Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, this is Representative Carl Seidel. Welcome to The People's View. And my co-host tonight is Jennifron Horn from We the People. And today we are interviewing our new majority leader, Peter Silva, Representative Pete Silva. Pete, can you tell us what's happened in Concord at the session, the last session that we've had?
Where do you want me to start?
Well, start with the fact that you're now majority leader.
Yeah, it's funny how things work out, but it's I'm simply that because I have seen a lot in the press. They're saying that Bill appointed me. That's not what happened. As deputy, the definition is of deputy is you take over for a leader or whatever the position is when they're not there. Mm-hmm. And so it's
not at the discretion. It's not the discretion of the Speaker of the House. It's written in the rules that you're the next guy in line.
Because this time was a historic time that the leader was elected.
Right.
So theoretically, the Speaker wouldn't be able to appoint anyone in that office.
Now, before we talk about what the Republicans have accomplished in this session, let's look ahead, because you just said something I thought was interesting. This time around, the body chose to have an election for Speaker. Going into the next session, it's going to be the same way, and they will have the position be elected, or is it the opening? Is there a possibility that they'll go back to kind of the old way of doing things and have it appointed?
Great question, and it's a little bit complex because it is politics. So what will happen, for the people who don't know, is the Speaker's the first one elected.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So the Speaker will start campaigning, right? Whoever's going to run for Speaker will start campaigning the day they get elected to try to get people to support them. So naturally, it's very difficult to unseat a sitting Speaker. I don't think it's ever happened, from what I understand. Some people have been around for a while have been telling me. Right. So naturally, you'd think that Bill O'Brien would be the natural candidate. Now,
if he decides to run.
If he decides to run.
Right.
Now, if in fact he is going to need the support of the majority of the House, obviously, to do that, or the Republicans, if they decide they want an elected leader, then they'll have to do that again. So in other words, if he doesn't want it and he doesn't support that, then he won't get the support from certain groups. And as you all well know, there's all different little groups inside the party. But
technically, whoever's the Speaker, whoever wins that race for the Speaker of the House has the authority to decide that either he's going to appoint those positions or he will open up for election.
Right, but he'll certainly get asked.
And in order for Bill O'Brien or any other Republican to be in the running to be Speaker, Republicans are going to have to win the majority again. So
correct.
Maybe that's a good transition to go back to what have they accomplished? What are the accomplishments and the messages that Republicans will be running on?
Well, here's the other tricky part, though. Also, you can get a speaker from the other party that's supported kind of as a Trojan horse. Mm-hmm. So you could get, theoretically, let's say the party's it's not as wide of a gap as it was this time. So let's say we have 250 and they have 150. So if you have all 150, as we know they're very good at doing, keeping all their votes together, they could go ahead and pick, like there's rumors of Lee Quant, who's a big union guy. Pick him.
Who's a Republican.
Who's a Republican.
To make it clear for our audience who doesn't know.
Exactly.
They don't know every rep by name.
Exactly.
Right.
So they could support him. There's 150 votes right there. And then if he has 51 other votes, then he could be the Speaker.
Right.
And technically be supporting a Democratic major labor platform.
Now, has Lee expressed an interest in that, or has anyone other than Speaker O'Brien expressed an interest in running next time?
He actually was in the Portsmouth Herald yesterday, saying that he wanted to run.
So it could be really interesting.
Yes.
I understand similar things like that happened with Doug Scammon.
That's exactly
the other Republican who passed away. I can't remember his name, but anyway, the Democrats voted him in, even as a Republican Speaker. So anything can happen.
So it's on your shoulders.
It's on everyone's shoulders to vote and make sure we get a big lead again.
But you've been in leadership for the full session, different
Yeah.
positions for the whole 2 years. And we're heading now into the open campaigning cycle. This whole summer into the fall, it's going to be all about campaigning. And of course, what's going to happen is the Republicans are going to run on their accomplishments. The Democrats are going to try to run against that Republican message in some way. So that's the first question. What are the Republicans from the House running on? Give us kind of the top 5, David Letterman's list, the top 5 accomplishments that you guys have that you think you'll be running on this year.
Well, number one, obviously, is the budget. We, for the first time, took over a budget that we've never been in the red before. The budget's always been balanced. They went through the rainy day fund. They went through everything. They spent it all.
They borrowed from the university. They did everything.
Wherever you could find it.
And they balanced with one-time money from the federal government.
That's right.
That's right.
And still we ended up with a deficit of almost $1 billion.
Exactly.
So how did you do it? How did you balance?
What they did is, and you got to give credit to Steve Stepanek in Ways and Means, it's kind of like the way we run our family's household. Instead of just saying, hey, look, let's just go charge everything, figure out how to pay for it at the end of the month, most people, especially with my wife, that's why I don't touch the checkbook, you figure out what you got to spend and what you can spend.
Right.
So we did it actually, wow, unique idea. We gave really good projections and estimates of what we're going to take in, what our income was going to be.
Okay.
And they came within like
a percent or less.
of it. It's
Wow.
remarkable.
So
actually.
the initial estimates that the budget was predicated on to begin with were within 1% of
1%.
of the actual. That's incredible.
It's amazing.
Well, although it seems incredible, but maybe the lesson we should get out of that is it's doable. It's possible. So
Completely
no
doable.
more accepting
That's
the
right.
excuses of legislators who tell us, "Oh, we didn't bring in as much as we thought we were going to." Well, clearly we have the ability to figure that out.
Well, that's the first thing they accuse us of, is that we
Right.
were underestimating our income. So we're trying to make it look bad. And you can't fake the income. It is what it
Right.
is. And we came within 1% of that. So that's how we were able to do it. That was,
So the budget was balanced.
yeah.
The deficit was eliminated. What else did you do that's worth talking about?
Well, one of the things still pending, obviously, because he's going to veto it, is voter ID, which I think is
Okay.
a huge thing. And I gauge a lot of my accomplishments as the House of what people say to me, what I hear in the street. Gay marriage was a huge thing. I knew right off the bat we weren't going to make that happen because we have a part of our party that just doesn't want any laws, any rules, anything.
Well,
So
the
that's
Republican
difficult.
Party has grown in their representation over the last couple of cycles. We have a much louder libertarian voice in the
Yep.
Republican Party than we used to. We have a loud liberty voice that's a little bit different from the libertarian, and then we have the kind of the conservative and more moderate Republican voices that have been there for a long time. So I look at that honestly, and even though it might impact individual pieces of legislation, I think that's a good thing. We have become strong. I think we have the potential to become stronger as a party when we're able to embrace a slightly broader message in that way.
Isn't that somewhat ironic?
So,
I mean,
What
the Democrats always complain
I know.
that they're the ones that welcome everybody. And really, if you look at the voting record, they were very narrow-minded as far as what they supported.
well, there is a liberal elite mentality that you must be tolerant of we have to have this great tolerance of everyone out there as long as you fall within the
Yeah, that's
opinions
right,
of the
that's right.
liberal elite, of the
whole-
leadership
that's the
of the
whole thing.
Democratic
That's the
Party.
engine right
It's such a bizarre approach, and when you hear some of them speak at times, they are completely invested in it. They believe what they're saying. But the truth is, it's, as you said, very narrow, very intolerant. And I think that the Republican Party grows and becomes stronger when we are able to bring more voices in who at least we can stand together on some of those core principles, core values. And voter ID, to get back to where we started on this, is one of those. Protecting what I look at voter ID, and you can tell me if I understand and don't understand this correctly. I look at voter ID as something that is protecting the most treasured element of our democratic republic. There is nothing more sacred in that system than your vote. And when we look at everything else in the world that we require positive ID to
Anything.
accomplish, I'm not sure what the argument against voter ID can be.
The funny thing is, when you look at the vote that we had last time on it, I just looked it up again today. There was 105 that voted against it. 10 of those were Republicans,
Okay?
so-called. and there was 255 that voted for it. So that's a dynamic, gap. But here's the thing: that how can you ever have something like what you just said? Is such common sense, but not one Democrat voted against it, or for it.
For it, right.
Now, ironically, if you
Now, is that about party unity, or is that about genuinely there is some sort of principle that they're voting on there that I just don't understand?
No, it's party unity. They'll tell you that, but the part that's ironic is if you all of a sudden, if you were able to take a magic wand and switch tomorrow the dynamics of the people who vote Democrat, like in the large blocks. If you take minorities, if you take inner city, those blocks that go normally, you look at the cities like California and LA and stuff like that, they all vote Democrat. If you switch their alliance all of a sudden to now that they voted for Republicans, the Democrats would be the first ones up there screaming for voter ID. They would do it like that. So it's all about them preserving what they perceive to be, which I don't even know if we ever have real numbers on how much voter fraud there really is of busing people, and I don't know.
Well, we don't have real numbers, and I think one of the blocks to getting voter ID over the decades has been we've got there's never been a concerted effort to confirm the validity of our vote anywhere in our state. We know that in other states that they've been able to confirm voter fraud in a number of cases. And to me, I would have thought that this was an issue that was pretty nonpartisan, because voter fraud can theoretically take place by any party, by any individual, by any group of a special interest group that's trying to sway a particular vote. So it's never been about protecting Republicans or protecting Democrats. It's supposed to be about protecting the vote. Now, you're talking about a veto. The governor's almost surely going to veto that one. We have a veto-proof majority in the House. What about the Senate?
The Senate, we have like a 2-vote cushion. We need 16, and they had 17 last time.
Okay. So we've got the possibility that this could actually go through anyway.
It really is up to the Senate.
Right.
And it's their bill.
I would think that that's a strong accomplishment that Republicans will be able to campaign on.
It's huge.
So what else? We've balanced the budget. We've eliminated an almost $1 billion deficit. We've pushed, and we're this close to finally having voter ID in the first in the nation state. We should have it. What else have you accomplished?
Just one more thing I do before I forget. If you asked about if is a block vote of unity, if you ask Democratic constituents, they almost all of them want it.
Voter ID polls very high across political lines.
That's right.
There's no question.
So how could they be representing their constituents if every single one of them voted against it? I think it's important to know that.
Right.
I think when people are making their choice in November, they should consider that.
Right. Well, that's going to be your job as candidates to make sure they know the difference.
There's 2 examples that are really current. People looking now more with Obamacare that requires a voter, some kind of ID. You can't go on, you can't get approval, you can't get your prescription if you don't have some kind of ID. And what's happened in Florida right now, where the federal government is suing Florida, and Florida's countersuing back because they want to clean up they had claimed that there's several hundred people that they found were dead that voted.
In one area of the state, several hundred in one area of the state. And the federal government, you're right, is now trying to stop, they're calling it a voter purge. When we do have a state that's trying to take responsibility for maintaining integrity in their voter rolls, the federal government gets in the way. But I suppose at this stage, it's just about implementing some sort of a security at the point of voting here. It's not about going back through the rolls and trying to purge at this point.
It's a start.
Right.
It's a really good start, and then from there you'll be able to have you'll see these affidavits, and I think that's one of the things we're going to be in for, though, is they're going to organize people just coming up to flood certain polls just to try to aggravate the clerks. Because all the clerks really give us a hard time on this.
Well, because it does have the potential to increase their workload.
And cause confusion.
Well, it seems to me it's something that we should be able to, in time anyway, become much more electronic, much more internet-based.
They're not going to do it every single time. It's a deterrent.
Right.
If you know that someone's going to ask you for an ID, that's more than if you know they're not going to ask you anything.
Right.
So it's a good start.
It's where we belong. I think it's appropriate.
Absolutely.
And it's one that I feel strongly about. And as we've just said, I think it's something that I've never met somebody who said to me, "No, you shouldn't have to prove who you are to vote." And you think about all the things the federal government mandates, and and identification for in order for you to do. Why do we,
Nothing. The
how
most basic
is
things.
somehow voting less valuable than any of those other issues?
You need
So-
an idea to get a school lunch, for God's sake.
Right,
you know,
right, right.
It really is.
So-
It's almost, you can't even make it up, actually. That's why
Right.
we need to talk about it, because people need to see how ridiculous it really is. I think that the big thing, we did part of it. Another one is we did attack pension reform in the state. And I don't think anyone realizes the complexity, the monster that we've created.
Right.
And as I say, that's Republicans did that plan in the 70s. They were in charge. And we have a system right now that can't function.
Well,
It can't
you
sustain
frequently
itself.
end up with unintended consequences to something a decade or 2 decades down the line, but that doesn't excuse putting your head in the sand and ignoring those
That's right.
problems. So a pension reform has not fully, you weren't able to come up with a plan that
Right.
both houses could agree on, but we've opened the door and we've started that conversation. Welfare fraud is another one that it sounds like
It's huge.
are just, and with this one, we do have some kind of measurable results to a study that was released about 2 months ago, I think.
There's, again, dead people receiving welfare. There's
People living
don't-
out of state.
Don't even
Right.
live in the state. I forget the exact numbers, but it's
Potentially
a lot.
hundreds of millions of dollars is the problem. And whenever we have these conversations, whether it's about pension reform, welfare fraud, all the balancing the budget, what I always think gets lost in the conversation when you end up with a Republican and Democrat arguing across the table over it is the third party to every government transaction is the taxpayer.
Yeah.
And it's too often taxpayers don't have you guys are supposed to be our direct voice in that process. And whether it's, something like what happened out in Wisconsin with Scott Walker and union reform, or anytime we're talking about government reform, the primary voice in that should be the taxpayer. And when you talk about pension reform and welfare fraud, we're talking about taxpayer dollars. Programs that are fully funded by taxpayers. So I was very pleased that we at least took those issues on this time. And hopefully that opened the door for next time around to make more progress on them.
Well, they always represent it as if we didn't pass it. We passed it. It got
Right.
vetoed.
Well, they didn't pass
Yeah.
it. I mean, let's be honest, who passed it? Who paid for, who voted for it? And who didn't vote for it?
Oh, no, exactly. And
right.
one of the other things that I want to look into next time, Carl and I have talked about this, we're getting to a really alarmingly high rate of public union people that are representatives. And for them to be able, at minimum, to be able to vote on pension issues, if that's not a conflict of interest, I'm not sure what is. We have to list all of our other conflicts, but most people they'll take themselves out of the vote. But it's well over 100.
Over 100 members of our House are union members?
Either
Are they public employee unions?
public employee unions. I don't
Interesting.
count like, auto workers union, that doesn't matter to
Right.
me. But public unions where we're paying their salary.
Or they're retired.
Or
people.
retired.
Yeah.
Right.
From a public.
And they're depending on the pension and the benefits and
Correct.
everything else that came with their plan.
You can't
I hadn't
blame them.
considered that.
They were given that option,
Right.
and they just took advantage of what the rules were.
Right.
And I think, as you said, unintended consequences.
Well, and there's a difference between taking advantage of the package that was offered to you
Right.
and manipulating that, or
yeah.
in some way, instituting fraud against that. And so there's two different
Well,
things
it's
that we're
not
talking
fraud.
about.
Yeah, it's a
Sometimes
fraud.
it is and sometimes it
Well,
isn't. It
yeah,
depends.
that's
right.
true.
So when we're talking about pension reform, for example, are we talking about from here forward, or are we talking about redefining packages that people were given 10, 20,
I think
30 years ago?
that's all on the table, isn't it, Pete?
Well, what's going to happen is simply this. One day they're going to go to cash a check, it's going to bounce. I mean, that's the bottom line. You listen to
You
some
gotta
of these
change it.
numbers.
Yeah, you got to
it's
change
like
it.
$6 billion we're on course for. There's only 1.5 million
Right.
people in the state. That's like $9,000 for every living soul in the state, just for
Right.
pension.
Not even $1.5 million.
Yeah. So I
Right.
mean, you can't do it. So whatever happened in Wisconsin, that's a huge union state, and they
Mm-hmm.
went crazy, and they're voting for it.
Well, you know what was interesting in Wisconsin, and I suspect we would see a reflection of this in New Hampshire if we ever got through the full process, is what happened once they passed it, that recall didn't come until a year later. The support for those reforms grew over that year rather than diminishing, because not just union members, but every citizen of that state lived with the positive outcome, the productive results of that. So the vote for Scott Walker in that recall wasn't just, he won by 5 points originally. I don't know what the final number was. It was somewhere between 8 and 13
That's right.
points. It kept. I didn't watch it to the very end.
It's 8 or 9
So
points, I think, was the
he
final.
won by more, and the union membership, union enrollment in that state dropped by over a third, almost by half. So in the past year. So what we see is that when given the choice, people are not choosing what they're currently being forced into. And they live with the results of those reforms, and they see the positive outcome, and they like them more and more and more. Teachers and other public employee unions campaigned for Scott Walker in this recall. I suspect we would see the same thing in New Hampshire.
Yeah, I think this time we'll have more publicity on it, and I think that's what you said is to go to that
more
point.
Education.
It got out in the open longer.
More understanding of what the critical factors are. Because one of the things is the union has a monopoly. Once you have to be part of the union, everybody comes in. But if the union had to respond to the members' needs voluntarily.
And that's what aggravated me about CACR 12. I mean, I never
That was the
believed-
education funding.
Correct.
Okay, let's talk about that. It seemed like it was this close, and then in the end, it was really Republican votes that lost that.
I mean, ultimately, it's Lynch's vote that lost that. He didn't bring us one Democrat. You know, he was supposed to. All he needed is bring 10.
Okay.
So if he brought, 10% of his caucus, then we would have won.
Well, let's talk about that for a second. Is that you think a reflection of Governor Lynch having lost any influence as essentially a lame duck in that position? Did he not have the influence over the caucus to begin with? Was this another case of the Democrats have decided anything the Republicans offer, we're going to be against it regardless?
Let's put it this way. If he took in, like I saw him do in my first term, when he started taking people inside and talking about gay marriage, like one by one. Right. If he did that with this, he could have gotten 10. It would have passed. He could have gotten 10. So when I did my interview and they did record half of what I said, the last part of my statement was this portion. They never said that. They never played that part of it. Ultimately, he played us. I give him credit. He played a great game and he won. Right. He had no intention. I saw, I think it was on Close Up, it was, Ben Baruti from Manchester said he never got a phone call. Okay. He's a leader. He doesn't know anyone else.
So the
that got
governor
a phone
just
call.
put his name on it but never did anything with it?
Nothing.
And 10 votes from the Democratic side would have pushed that in spite of the Libertarian vote, Republican vote that did not support it.
And the Libertarians didn't vote for it because we had changed the word from the House original. Okay, that word was the one word, responsibility,
it was responsibility versus
that the governor wanted. And if we said the heck with the governor and went with ours and the Senate went along with us, we could have got that.
It would have passed.
The Senate wouldn't have, though.
The Senate wanted the responsibility right in there, too. I have to tell you, I really respect the position that the Libertarians took on it. I don't know, I'm not a state rep, so I don't have to answer that question. I don't know how I would have voted. I understand where they're coming from, but I also understand, for example, Charlie Arlinghouse from the Josiah Bartlett Center makes a very eloquent defense of the education funding amendment. He was a strong supporter of it and lays out very clearly that he saw that it was not an assault on individual liberty. So, so that was a difficult.
This is the problem with it.
But,
they could have had
before
their
you even say
go
that,
ahead.
the great thing is it was a difficult conversation among Republicans. But again, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. We have those debates within our party, and I think that's a good thing.
But you have to also evaluate where you draw the line. And this example, this is the best one that I can give. And I talked to a lot of them individually. And I give George Lambert a lot of credit. He's, a hardcore libertarian. He voted with us on CACR 12 for the one simple reason. Nobody is going to explain in a 3-sentence blurb on a ballot what the hell Claremont is.
Right.
You're not going to do it.
Right.
I still have a hard time sometimes with it. It's very complex to get to the core of what it really means. And you have people fighting it for different reasons. You have your real constitutionalists. So that being said, that was never going to pass 67% of the vote on a ballot. It's just not going to happen. You'll pass things in constitutional amendments that are cut and dry. For example, if you had the gay marriage
So are you saying you don't
issue,
think we can ever fix Claremont? I mean, I don't feel like we're stuck with Claremont. I think we can fix that.
But what you could have done is taken a step in the right direction. Have that on the ballot. Now you have 5 months to debate it. Now it's on the news every night. Now they're talking to everybody. Everyone's just Claremont, Claremont,
Right.
Claremont. Now you're not going to hear a
Education.
word about it.
Right.
That's what makes me aggravated about it. They could have their cake and eat it too, but by going for 100%, we get the donut.
Well, do you mind if I keep asking questions?
go on.
This is your show. Let's talk about the two constitutional amendments. I think that they both did pass to an amendment that would state that we remain an income tax-free
Correct.
state, and did the spending cap essentially that would require
didn't
that
pass.
didn't pass the
Didn't pass
Senate.
either.
Then we don't have to discuss that one at all. But let me say again, at least we're having the conversation about responsible spending.
Right.
Where it has been discussed for decades whether or not our income tax-free status should be in the Constitution. I had a very frustrating conversation with a Democrat on a radio station a couple weeks ago about this, and his argument was by putting in the Constitution, then we eliminate the possibility of ever being able to access that revenue stream if it became absolutely necessary. And I was frustrated because my answer was always, yes, exactly. That's the whole point, that we will never be able to create an income tax as a revenue stream, forcing the House and the Senate to spend within their means without putting an undue burden on the people and without damaging the business environment and that income tax-free status helps preserve for us. So what's going to happen with that? And what was the argument against it?
Well, the argument against it, again, is they start telling you, you're going to throw the old folks out in the street and you're not going to have any, aid anymore for severely handicapped and no more education right down the line.
In spite of the fact that that's not happening at the moment, and when did
but it's gonna.
when did we have, I know, that's always the
That's
argument,
what they
isn't
said
it?
when we
Walk
cut the
outside.
budget.
It's always the elderly, the children,
That's right.
okay. But and I don't want to say that flippantly now that I hear I have never met a Republican who hasn't been willing to say one of the roles of government is to provide a safety net for the most vulnerable among us.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean that you do it through an income tax in the great state of New Hampshire.
And that was one of the things with gambling before. When gambling came up as the same thing on the path you're going down, the first year when it came out and they were in charge, I voted against it. And the reason was, if you took in $200 million, they'd spend $4.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like crack.
Right.
So that's the problem, and you're exactly right.
Well, the other tack we're taking, Pete, maybe we ought to talk just we only have a few minutes left, is we're trying to expand our broad base of where the money comes from.
Who the taxpayers are.
Who the taxpayers
Okay.
are, who the businesses grow.
Yep,
The businesses grow, the income to the state grows.
Right.
And that was one of the things we were doing. We passed several laws that help businesses move and grow and become profitable and pay more taxes.
Then after balancing the budget, that should be the second thing every
That's
one
right.
of your candidates says, because that's where jobs come from.
Right.
So if the Republican agenda has been focused on jobs, and when you're talking to me about balancing budget, cutting fees, business-friendly environments, even the constitutional amendment to put the income tax-free into the Constitution, those are all pro-job policies. Those are all
In
job
business,
growth policies.
Look at the cigarette tax. They
Right.
already we are filing now in the black. We gained money off cigarette tax by lowering it 10%.
By lowering it.
That's right. Not to mention what it's done to all the border towns
Right.
that when they
That's
come in,
so
they don't
bad,
just
yeah.
buy cigarettes.
Well, we have historic precedent to understand how this works. You can look at New York City, and when Rudy Giuliani became mayor, if you remember all the hand-wringing among the liberals down in New York, he's cutting. All of New York City will be living in the streets in a year.
Right.
And what happened was exactly the opposite, exactly what you just indicated, that businesses perked up and they said, oh, what? It's going to cost less to do business in New York? And they started to come back in again. And it was a whole rebirth, a whole economic renewal for the city because he was cutting tax rates.
And every time you do it, it works. Every time you do the opposite, it doesn't work. But like they say, the definition of insanity, do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result.
You know who else
It's-
understood this? President John F. Kennedy. He was a
did.
tax cutter.
Yeah,
He was a
did.
tax cutter.
He did.
Yeah, listen to his speeches that he gave. You'd sound like a conservative Republican in today's day and age.
You guys did a great job this year. We appreciate what you did. You guys did a great
Thank you.
job. We're interviewing him, but you were one of them as well. Thank you for having me today.
Well, you're quite welcome. Thank you, Representative Silva.
You're going to be on the other side of the
We're going to also have
Table again.
the Speaker and the Senate President coming up in the upcoming weeks. So remember that People's View is sponsored by the Nashua City Republican Committee, and if you go to nashuagop.org, you can read all about the committee. We're having the second Thursday of every month, we have a meeting at the Crown Plaza. Everybody's welcome. Thank you very much for joining us.